And thank you for coming at the end of a long day. I know you're all tired. You've been doing hard work, invaluable work, and Governor Jindal didn't say thank you. So I'm here to say thank you for the work you do. Now, you might well wonder why I'm here. It's because I was going to New Orleans this weekend to meet with about 50 of my college classmates. We're all pretty old right now. But I decided if I'm coming to Louisiana, I want to do some good work on your behalf. And so I contacted my friend Noel Hammett, and I said, can you set something up where I can go head-to-head with somebody in the Jindal administration? So he did that through Gene Armstrong. We had a lunch today, and first they invited John White, and he declined. Because he knows that I live in New York City, and I know what he did in New York City. He had nothing to do with education. He had nothing to do with curriculum and instruction. He had nothing to do with the academic side of schooling. He was the guy who would come into schools and measure them to say, we're putting a charter school in your building. We're co-locating a charter school. The people in the public schools called it a charter invasion, but he and his pals called it a co-location. So he was the guy who came and measured the space to either close their school or stick a charter school in. That was the sole extent of his responsibility, on which he's now the New York State Superintendent of Education. He's never run a school, he's never been a principal, he's never been a superintendent, except for the 5 minutes in New Orleans. But he turned it down, and then Chaz Romer said yes. And I was very fortunate because we each were given 15 minutes, and Gene had a straw to see who went first, and I went first. And that didn't leave him anything to say. Because I talked about the evidence on vouchers, and the evidence on charters, and the evidence on merit pay, and the evidence on teacher evaluation by test scores. And he got up and talked about being a redneck, and he really loves his children, and he just wants to give people choices and things like that. So it was a really interesting day, but I have to tell you that I keep very close tabs on Louisiana because you have so many wonderful bloggers in this state, and I have so many friends who send me stories from either the New Orleans paper, the Times-Picayune, or from the Advocate or other papers. But basically, you've got some very courageous folks who tell the truth. It's usually because they're retired. And so Mike Deshotels has a fabulous blog. There's a fellow named Crazy Crawfish, which if you haven't read him, you should read him. And then there's a group. The blog is called LouisianaEducator@gmail.com. That's the email. But he is creating, at Louisiana Educator Blogspot, is creating a group called the Defenders of Public Education. And you should all join it. Because what's so crucial in these terrible times is that you work together. It's that you're a collective. If there's just one person standing up by themselves, they'll be fired. But when hundreds and thousands of people stand together, they can't touch you. And right now you probably are aware that in Seattle there's a high school called Garfield High School. And first it started with the English teachers, and they said, why are we giving this stupid map test again? It doesn't mean anything, it's just another waste of 2 weeks of our time. And so the English department decided they didn't want to give the map test. Then the math department decided they didn't want to give the map test. And then within days they had the entire faculty say, we are not giving the test. And this started a couple of months ago, and at first the superintendent said he was going to dock them 10 days' pay. But then people all over the country said, you dock them and we'll raise the money to make it up, whatever you dock them. He is still holding back. He's not done anything. They have not given the test, and they're getting international publicity for their courage in standing together. Frankly, I wish it was the entire city of Seattle. That would be even better. But when you act collectively, when you act and you say, I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing it because it's wrong. These politicians who don't know anything about education are asking you to engage in educational malpractice, and you know it. So if the time comes when you can say no, figure out how to do it together. And do not do what they tell you to do when you know it's wrong and it's not right for kids. And they'll accuse you of being defenders of the status quo, because they're of course leading us to a brave new future where there is no education profession and where people are making a profit off the children and off the taxpayers. They have a lot of really bad ideas, and because they have not taught, they've not worked in a classroom, they don't seem to understand children. You wonder if they even have children, but I did find out today that at least some of them have children. So, what you have, and I say it with a certain sense of awe, is you have courage. And your courage is displayed by the fact that you're here. You're still here. And I read recently about the large numbers of people who've been retiring and who've been leaving well before it was time for them to leave, and they were leaving a job that they loved, a job where they felt that they were making a difference for children, but they felt that the politicians had made their life untenable, unbearable. And I think that's very sad. That's very tragic when we lose experienced educators because of the bullying by people in high places. And I always say, I understand why you're leaving, but I would urge you not to. And the reason I urge you not to is that I think what we're living through right now is so wrong that it cannot survive. They cannot win. And the reason they can't win, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of political power, and everything they advocate is failing. Everything they advocate is wrong. They cannot find or prove success anywhere in the United States. And there's just so long you can fool the people about what they are doing to the public schools, what they're doing to the dedicated educators who work in the public schools, and they will be found out, they will be exposed. And so you're still here, you're standing. Don't let them take you down. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them bully you to give up something that you want to do. And persist despite all the punishments that they have been trying to rain down upon you. Now, I'm frequently asked about this question of accountability. As you may or may not know, and Jean mentioned I worked in the first Bush administration, and I was for years a strong supporter of testing and accountability and choice. It all sounded like a good idea until people started doing it in earnest through No Child Left Behind. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is wrong. This is not working. It's wrong. It's not improving education. It's causing teachers to test, and to ignore the children in front of them, to standardize everything they do and pretend that the children are all the same or try to make them all the same, when in fact those of you who are with children every day know that each one is different. Each human being on this earth is different from every other human being. I don't know that, you know, this is not plant genetics we're talking about. This is not clay that we can mold. These are children, each of whom has a different set of experiences, a different brain, different needs. And so I lost faith in what I had believed. I began to think of it as faith-based policy, testing and accountability and choice. It doesn't work. It is not working. It hasn't worked for the last 10 years of No Child Left Behind. And yet our politicians, both at the state and national level, are doubling down to demand more testing and more accountability. And I think there's a role for testing. I'm not opposed to testing. I'm opposed to the misuse of testing. I think with tests you can see how children are doing. You can identify their needs more accurately. You can find out where you need to do more of something and less of something. And you can make sure that they're getting the right kind of instruction in your judgment. The way tests are being used now is punitive, or it's a reward. When you attach rewards and punishments to tests, it's a misuse. This is not what they were designed for. And I spent 7 years on the National Assessment Governing Board, which is the board that oversees NAEP, the federal test. And the cardinal principle of the test publishers was that tests should be used only for the purpose for which they were designed. Testers designed to assess whether children are on grade level, above grade level, below, to identify specific things about what they understood and didn't understand. And you use that in a formative way. They're not designed to say that this is a good teacher or a bad teacher. They're not designed to say this is a good school or a bad school. So they're being massively misused. And I've come to believe that this notion of accountability is misplaced also. Accountability belongs at the top, not the bottom. There's a man who was considered for many years the great guru of business, Edwards Deming, and he went to Japan back in the 50s and 60s and helped them redesign their economy and to help them understand the way that a corporation ought to function. And he never wrote about education, but in one of the books that I read about him, he talked about why performance pay was a very bad idea. And he said, among other things, he said, it sets people one against the other. They're teammates, they should be working together, but it puts them in competition, and one wants to beat the other, and neither one of them is thinking of the good of the organization. They're not thinking of the goals of the organization, they're not thinking long term, they're only thinking what's good for me, and that destroys the corporation. And it's a little bit like, the metaphor I think of is being in a cruise shell where everybody is supposed to be pulling in order to move the boat forward. And then you say to the members of the crew, whoever does the most strokes with their oar wins a prize. Well, your boat's going to turn over. You can't do that. You all have to work together. And when you're teachers, you don't keep your secrets to yourself. You say, you know, I've learned something about Johnny, I've learned something about Maria. Let's talk about the problems, let's talk about the issues, let's talk about how to help that child do better. And you share what you know. You don't say, I'm going to keep it a secret because I'll make a few dollars more if I keep it to myself. That's not the way a school functions. And politicians and business people don't understand, they don't understand that that a school works through collaboration and cooperation and teamwork, not by competition. You should not have competition within the schools, and what makes even less sense is competition between schools. Now you can understand sports competition makes sense. You want your team, you know, your teams go out and they play against each other. You have debate competitions, science fairs, things like that. That's fine. But you cannot run your school thinking we're going to beat the school in the next neighborhood. That's ridiculous. That has nothing to do with educating children. Educating children is about looking at these kids in front of you and saying, how can I help them understand better? How can I help them think more clearly? How can I help them improve their behavior so that they can have a life and become functional citizens? What you should be thinking about is not their test scores, but their personhood, their humanity, their character.